So, do you need to worry about spiritual protection, and why is the answer always yes? If you're watching this video, it means that you are somewhere on your spiritual journey. You may be at the beginning stages, you may be even in the pre-beginning stages, or you could be anywhere from intermediate to advanced, but still wanting to check up on your protections. You may not even consider yourself a spiritual worker of any kind yet. You do not have to consider yourself a psychic, a witch, or any other label in order to be in a situation where you may be attracting energy one way or another. So if you're not familiar with spiritual awakening, there's usually a period in someone's life where they either awaken or reawaken to the call of spiritual work in some way. For some of us, we put that away in childhood, and then in some point in our adult lives, we are called, sometimes rather dramatically, to re-enter the spiritual world and to become aware of it again. And with that comes sounds, voices, sights, shadow people, all these other things. You may be experiencing those things. You may have already gone through this, or for you, you just may have a curiosity, which is a sign in and of itself. But even if you're at the stage where you're simply just researching spiritual things, your interest may be attracting energy. So yes, protection is very important, because if you're entering a spiritual plane, whether it's just your curiosity itself, or if you're attempting some sort of channeling, divination, or astral travel even, your energy may be attracting other energies, and intentionally or not, those energies can affect you. Now, I'm going to talk very briefly about something that comes up a lot in the spiritual community, especially if you've been on Witch Talk, or Witch Talk tends to be pretty dramatic, but I was hearing for years about all these like spiritual attacks where certain practitioners on TikTok would talk about someone's after me, and my words are so strong and you can't get me. And it just seems to be, honestly, I'm kind of thinking some of it might be content farming. I think it's a little dramatic. I have to say, knock on wood, that in all my years doing spiritual work, I've never really felt like anybody intentionally came after me. Intentionally. What I mean by that is I don't ever feel like somebody has hexed me intentionally, or, tried to do a working against me. But the other thing that I want to talk about is that sometimes people may unintentionally be hexing you in some way. What that means is someone may just wish you ill, and those negative vibes can actually affect you energetically, even if they don't mean it to. And if somebody's saying your name a lot, they are working against you, even if it's not an intentional working. So you've got a bunch of different factors here. You've got your energy is attracting the energy of entities that are out there in the spiritual realm. You've got humans that you come into contact with that may not always have your best interest at heart, and sometimes that negative energy can stick to you, and more than sticking to you, sometimes it can penetrate you. That's a terrible word, but it can. It can mingle with your own energy and affect you pretty dramatically without somebody actually actively wishing to do so. And then in addition to, them wishing you ill, sometimes other people are just carrying energy on them and don't even know it, kind of like they're carrying a virus and you might accidentally pick it up. So I often think about spiritual protection as like basic protection against germs. Maybe you wear a mask, maybe you wash your hands a lot, maybe when you're sick, you stay home. Maybe if you feel like you might come into contact with sick people, you keep your distance. It's kind of the same thing with other people's energy. Think of it as an invisible virus that they don't know about. And I've also met people that are accidentally carrying around low vibrational entities, meaning they don't know it, and that entity is definitely affecting their life. That's not an energy I want to pick up. Places also have energy. If you've ever been somewhere where the room itself had strange vibes, or we have this practice group that sometimes I attend, and sometimes the energy workings get really intense and they tend to stain the room. And sometimes people carry that energy home with them and have bad dreams. One lady had a vision, and there were echoes of it even weeks later, where someone was meditating in that room and had a very similar, and frankly to them, very disturbing vision. So even if nobody's intentionally trying to harm you, because you may think, well, I'm fine, Gabby, nobody wishes me ill, nobody's coming after me. Honestly, most of this is accidental. just like picking up a cold. Nobody's giving you a cold on purpose, but it doesn't mean you don't want to protect yourself against the cold, and it doesn't mean that the cold virus doesn't get you down for a couple weeks. It's kind of the same vibe here. So yes, you do 100% need to worry about protection in a spiritual way, and it doesn't mean that you have to like go completely bonkers bananas off the deep end with like 50,000 wards and hours long ceremonies. Those are also options, by the way, but it doesn't mean you have to do that. So let's just all agree that yes, spiritual protection is really important if you are around anybody. If you meditate, if you go onto the astral realm, if you specifically do any workings. And then one thing I want to point out, I heard this recently and it makes sense, I just hadn't consciously thought it. The more advanced your own practice gets, the more advanced your protections need to be, because you may be coming into contact with more and more powerful entities and more powerful people. So your protections kind of need to level up the more you're leveling up, is a good way to think about it. So I'm very grateful that my friend Angie passed that on to me from a practitioner she was speaking to, because again, I know that, but I just hadn't consciously thought about it. So let's talk about the basics, and then I'm going to point you towards some resources at the end of the video that are going to help you do more research and learn more about it if you want to go beyond the basics. But the basics I'm about to cover are things that I think every single person who does any spiritual research or work of any kind needs to do, okay? So I'm going to talk briefly about protection versus cleansing, because think of protection as like a shield where something can't get at you. That's protection. And cleansing is somebody might, attach an energy to you, or you might accidentally pick something out, even through your wards, even through your protections, and you might need to cleanse yourself of that energy. Just like, again, washing your hands is cleansing. It's kind of the same thing. And then I mentioned wards, and those are another kind of protection, but that's protecting a space. So there's personal protections that you might wear or do for like your physical, spiritual vessel, but there's also things you do for your residence, your car, etc. And those are more wards because they're like protecting the space itself and you're in that space. And then what you carry on you is your protections. I hope that makes sense. So you've got wards, protections, and cleansings are kind of the three things we're going to go over today. So the first one let's talk about is wards. When most people talk about wards around their house, the very first one is plants. So a lot of practitioners love plants just because, green energy and, plants also cleanse the air. So plants are good for cleansing as well. But as a ward, plants are kind of your canary in the mine shaft. So if your plants have been super healthy and you don't change your routine and something happens to your plants, a lot of times that means they're doing their job and they've absorbed either an energy attack or just some sort of negative energy that has tried to come into your space. That's what the plant is supposed to do. It absorbs that negative energy and it actually does also cleanse it. So it's kind of a ward and cleansing, but you get what I'm saying. It's a ward for your house and it functions by also cleansing, but it absorbs the negative energy. So your plant might take a hit. It might get sick. It might start to die. It might lose, some big leaves or something. That's a sign that it's working. So what a lot of practitioners do is they'll place a live plant. I just want to reemphasize a living plant. Unfortunately, fake plants don't work for this, in the cardinal corners of the house. And so that can be either the different directions, north, south, east, and west, or depending on how your house is laid out, just significant corner areas of the house. It could be the windows of your bedroom, your office. So just kind of choose wisely where you're putting the plants, because obviously they need, air and sunlight to survive. So make sure they have like what they need to survive. But you place them around your house, you water them. If you really want to get in tune with them, also add some moon water when you water them, talk to them, thank them for their help. You can talk to them and ask them to help guard your house, but they just kind of function naturally that way. So they're warding your space. Another simple ward people do is putting salt around doorways and windowsills. So be a little careful with salt, just because if you are putting it on the ground, salt will kill the earth, salting the earth, so plants and stuff won't grow. So use salt smartly. So you can put it like in your doorway. You can put it, again, a lot of people put it in their windowsills. And again, salt can be corrosive, so just use it really like smartly. Some people use black salt where they they mix salt with their incense ash as protection, or you can even just like use incense ash itself without mixing in the salt. But a lot of people will use salt around the boundaries of their house as a ward to prevent unwanted energy from coming in. Now, the next kind of ward people do are sigils or runes that they might draw on the windows of their house. Some people even do sigils before they paint and then paint over the sigils so they're on the walls of the house as well as the windows. And then I've also seen people where they, you know, underneath their doormat, they kind of do a rune or a sigil on, like, my front porch is brick, by the way, so they might like use a selenite stick to draw on something underneath the doormat. And we say doormat, I'm just going to throw this in, we never put out a welcome mat that says welcome because you don't want to invite in any entities. This really strongly goes back to like Fae protections and belief with the Fae where you don't accidentally invite them in. So like my doormat does not say welcome. My current one is just cats. I've had one previously that says I'll see you in hell. That's one of my favorite ones. Very great around the holidays. But yeah, you don't want your doormat to say welcome basically. Because again, you don't want to be trying to block out entities while inviting them in at the same time. I hope that makes sense. But anyway, so underneath your doormat, you can put sigils and runes as well. And then I also keep a broom by the door, like one of those cinnamon Trader Joe's brooms. And that kind of wards a little bit as well. You can do the same thing with your car. Like you can draw with moon water on the windows so it's not like super visible that you've, you know, drawn on a sigil or a rune. Like don't use a Sharpie if you don't want somebody to see it. You can use moon water for that. And so going back to the selenite stick really quick, I don't know if you guys have ever done that, but selenite will leave like a chalk-like mark on concrete or brick. So a lot of people draw with their selenite sticks. It's actually pretty handy. Those are some basic wards. And then the other thing is that your cat or familiar, if you are into that kind of a practice where you have like an animal familiar, they also help guard you. And so they guard you against unwanted energy, especially when you're sleeping. And if your pets are getting sick, that's honestly like, sometimes, you know, always rule out the mundane first. Just any spiritual practice, anything we talk about, always rule out the mundane causes first. Make sure they're not eating bad plants, blah, blah, blah. But if your cats are getting sick, it might be a sign of an accidental or intentional spiritual attack. And I say accidental or intentional because sometimes some of these like very strong entities try and come through to us, and the way they come through can be fairly disturbing. They don't mean to, but their energy just may not be compatible with ours or with our familiars and may have unintended effects. It doesn't mean somebody or something wishes us harm, you know, just like I don't think the cold virus is intentionally making us sick. It's just doing what it does. It just isn't compatible with our system in a healthy way. It's the same thing, basically. Right. And then the other thing with your familiars is that they will shed whiskers and claws if you have cats. I'm sure other animals do something similar, but I am a cat person. And don't ever clip them for this or pluck out their whiskers or cut them or anything like that. But if they shed whiskers and claws, collect those because you can use those in protection workings. Like your cat is kind of giving you materials to help protect you in yet another way. So cat's claws are great to work into like protection spells, you know, spell jars, things of that nature if that's what you do. Even if you don't do that yet, just start collecting them. I feel like even having them collected in my house gives me like an extra ward, if you can think of it that way. And any sign that your ward is like breaking or getting sick, depending on what it is, can be a sign of negative energy, and that's where you might get into cleansing. And when you want to cleanse something, you can cleanse your home, you can cleanse your body, you can cleanse vessels. So like I make a lot of like oils, and I'm gonna try not to set myself on fire, and like spell jars and stuff like this one. So I washed this and then I also smoke cleansed it with incense before using it. So I go into like quite a few layers of cleansing when I do things. Having said that, smoke cleansing, I use incense, or I might burn some non-toxic sacred herbs that are not from a closed practice. So a lot of people ask me about sage. I'm just going to say what a lot of practitioners say, which is true for me, which is that I don't burn sage specifically because that is a closed practice. But the indigenous peoples where sage and smudging is part of their practice have specifically asked us not to use it. So I'm going to respect that. That's my own personal belief, is that I choose to respect closed practices. And that is one, even though that's been very popularized. And I know a lot of people who are entering this space and this practice who don't know that. And I don't judge them for what they don't know, but I do always try and educate and just make sure people know the people who originated that have asked us not to. And I genuinely think it's important to respect that. So, but I do use incense sticks, and I do sometimes burn herbs that are not sage. And you can buy other bundles, by the way. So if you really like the bundles of dried herbs, you can get rosemary, you can get other dried herb bundles that will also cleanse a large space without impinging on anybody else's closed practice or beliefs, which again, very important to me personally. Another good way for cleansing is actually bells. I don't hear people using bells enough or talking about bells. So energy is vibrational and sound is a vibration. So there's been this like recent thing about sound healing getting popular, which I love, but I just wish we talked more about sound cleansing, because it's kind of the same thing in a different font where you're like using the sound vibrations to achieve an effect. And in this case, it can disrupt negative energy, and it disrupts and dissipates negative energy. So before I do my tarot readings, for example, I might smoke cleanse my space and myself with an incense stick. And sometimes if I'm just doing back-to-back readings and I just keep getting the same cards, I'm like, oh my gosh, this energy is like sticking. I will then pull out the bells. Or if I'm doing some sort of like ritual or ceremony or spell, same thing. I pull out the bells. So I'm going to show you the one I use the most. I have larger ones, but I really like the sound of this small bell. I'm going to ring it, and I hope it doesn't overwhelm you guys, but this is very tiny. So I do have to say I have a lot of bells of all different sizes. This just happens to be my favorite. It's really cute, but again, it fits on my reading table. It doesn't take up space, and I like the sound of it. Okay, I'm going to ring it really quick. Like, it's just like a happy little chime, right? So for me, it disrupts any negative energy in the space, but it also makes me happy because I consider it to be like a happy little sound. All right, I know that's probably a little bit silly. And then there's another good thing to use for cleansing, which is cleansing water. This is a homemade cleansing water, but you can buy some of these in stores. And this is my own take on a cleansing water. So you may have heard of Florida water, which is like a teal, blue, or turquoise colored like cologne that comes from a southern practice. And Florida water, I think, is heavily used in Florida, but also in like Louisiana. So recently I've heard that Florida water itself and like the recipe is also a closed practice. I'm not sure about that. What I have done is made my own recipe, and I call it Texas water. It's a totally different color, by the way. The base of this is like a sprayable, wearable alcohol. You don't want to use water because things will rot in the water. It sounds really gross, but you can make this yourself. And so what I do is I will choose the herbs and citruses, I'm gonna leave it at that, and some spices as well. And you soak it for at least like a month. It's also great if you leave it out under the full moon and let the moon charge it as well. And then the base I use is, honestly, I use vodka. You can use like different kinds of like distilled alcohol, but it's very important not to use water because the ingredients they can mold and mildew and have the opposite effect. I use this before a spell, like to cleanse any energy from my hands. So like wash your hands, soap and water, all that's great, but this, and it smells so good. So I use my homemade cleansing water, which again is not actually based on water, to cleanse a space, a room, and my hands before any workings. And it kind of gets you in the zone and in the vibe as well as cleansing, and it smells delicious. Now, in the actual practice of Florida water, they also recommend like washing your floors and countertops with this periodically, again, to cleanse it energetically as well as like physical cleansing. So that's another thing I want to talk about, because I don't know if most people would consider this protection magic. I would call this preventative, which is that you need to keep your space clean as possible, because any clutter, mess, old food, you know, kind of things like that, that can draw in negative energy. So to me, part of protection is prevention as well. And before any magical workings, making sure you're cleansing ahead of time prevents introducing any corrupting or corruptible elements. And the same thing with your space, like keeping it tidy, keeping it clean physically will prevent attracting additional negative energy and negative entities, because some low vibrational entities are drawn towards mess, disorganization, and like filth, like literal filth. So just keep that in mind, that that is a preventative aspect of protection. So yeah. And then the other thing you can do is a salt cleanse. So salt is great for protection. We talked a little bit about it in wards, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a second. Salt is great for protection, and you can use it for cleansing as well. And so, I mean, even just making your own homemade salt scrub with like salt, oil, and essential oils, you know what I mean? You can shower with it, this salt scrub. You can put Epsom salts in your bath, but just really focus on salt's cleansing properties, because you can be cleansing yourself spiritually as well as physically when you're taking showers and baths, and salt is a great way to do it. Now, salt is another great like all-purpose protection, and you can use any kind of salt, honestly. It does not have to be fancy. I do prefer like roughly coarse ground salt because I like it aesthetically, but I'll put it around my candles before doing a candle spell. I'll put it around like a circle if I'm doing anything else. And you've heard of that as salt being a barrier and a boundary. So it works for a house, but it also works as a ward if you're doing an intentional working. And I think that it's good to get in the habit of having a lot of salt and using a lot of salt. And even in my spell jars, salt is always the base. I always start with a base of protection and really consider like keeping out any unwanted energies and unwanted effects from my spells. Like people often talk about, oh, I'm so afraid to do like a spell jar for XYZ because what if like this stuff I don't mean to happen happens? And I'm like, well, you have to set that as part of your intention, that no harm, you know, harm to none, you know, harm to me. Like I want this manifestation to work with, you know, for my greatest good and for everybody else's greatest good and with no harm, you know. So setting that intention of no harm is so important. And so just getting in the habit of laying down salt and setting that intention at the same time is great for protecting against unwanted things. And that's it for cleansing for the most part. We covered sound cleansing, smoke cleansing, and salt cleansing, as well as having like a cleansing water. If I've missed any cleansing basics, please put that in the comments, because I feel like I'm missing something obvious and it's escaping me at the moment what that might be. Now, let's talk about personal protection, because we talked about how to ward your house and car. We've talked about cleansing, but personal protection is where I get real serious, right? Like, do all of the things I just mentioned, by the way. These are all basics to me. I'm not getting into any advanced things. But a lot of times people will tell me, well, I cleanse, do I still need to do protection? And I'm like, yes, it's the same thing as like staying away from sick people, but also washing your hands every time you go in and out of the house. Like cleansing is a great habit to be into, but that's not the only thing you do. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with this, where yeah, it's great if you're doing your energy cleansings, but you also need to be making sure you're protecting yourself. Now, one of the most basic forms of protection is if you identify with any spirit guides and or deities that you work with, it is totally great to ask them to guard you and protect you, and they will. And I am going to say though, do not solely rely on that. They are also expecting you to take your own basic precautions. Like they don't expect to do everything for you. They'll play their part, but their part in your protections is just one piece of it. They're expecting that you're doing the basics on your own, right? Like you can't expect them to be constantly doing everything in your life for you. You're here to learn and grow and progress and learn to work with energy and do things on your own. They can't do all the work for you. They're not supposed to. That's not what they're for. So they'll play their part in protecting you. And you can ask your spirit guides or deities, hey, if I'm doing this working, please be with me and guard me from unintended consequences, or don't let in any energies that I don't intend to be here. Like, call on them for, I would say, like, your workings, and also use the salt. Like, I hate to say this because I know a lot of people have religious trauma, but it's almost like the non-Christian spiritual version of the Lord helps those who help themselves. It's kind of the same vibe, to be honest, in the spiritual community here. Candles are a great example. Like, hey, like, if your candle's acting wacky, blow it out. Don't just expect your spirit guides to protect you from fire. Like, you have to do your own work too, right? Like, it's kind of the same vibe. So yes, you can ask your spirit guides and deities for help and to guard you and protect you. And especially on big circumstances, they also want you to be doing your part. And other ways you do your part is, you know, protecting yourself from other energies. So you'll see a lot of people start to go more and more into like wearing certain jewelry as part of protection. So I'm just going to go back to color magic really quick because it's one of my favorite things. Black is the basic color of protection. And so any black stone will give you some sort of protection. So I'm always wearing a black bracelet. I used to, when I was going through my divorce and I really needed to protect myself energetically, I wore black clothes every single day. And people used to joke about it, but they didn't understand. Like, for me, it was some serious spiritual and emotional protection to wear black, the color of protection. And I wasn't being like goth or emo or, you know, going dark or anything like that. It was just a protection color for me. So wear your something black for protection. And also there's other crystals that absorb and possibly even transmute negative energy. So other bracelets and other crystals people wear are helping with that too. So I'd say, you know, wearing crystals and watching the colors you wear is one of the most basic forms of personal protection you can do. Now, you also, if you're worried that somebody does have like harmful thoughts or something, there are certain spells you can do that I'd say, I don't know if I would consider this part of basic protection, but to me it's basic protection if you are an active practitioner of any kind, which is transmutation wards. So I'm not going to get into details because, you know, that would be a whole video on its own. So let me know if you want that video. But transmutation wards and transmutation spells take negative energy that's directed towards you and turn it into something that actually benefits you. Like, you can make a spell jar that its purpose is transmutation. If anybody sends me negative energy, turn that into money for me, basically. Like, that's money in my pocket. That's a transmutation spell. So I would say that, you know, doing candle spells and spell jars for protection and transmutation would be just a little bit past the basics. Still beginner. That's if you're doing active work, if that makes any sense. So asking your spirit guides for protection, wearing things that protect you. And you can also wear certain amulets, necklaces. It doesn't just have to be crystals specifically, and it certainly doesn't just have to be crystal bracelets, but wearing things that are symbols of protection are good. Speaking of symbols of protection, I haven't talked a lot about runes. I mentioned runes and symbols, but another thing you can do, and I've done this when I was working through some things where I felt like I needed extra protection, is you can actually draw sigils and runes of warding and or protection on your body. And so, you know, where you draw them, that is up to your own practice. Like, sometimes it's like the inside of the wrist. You know, I've known people who've gotten symbols and sigils and whatnot tattooed on them. Like, I think that's totally fine. You know, it's just kind of, you know, putting a permanent protection symbol on yourself. Another form of protection is, this was new to me, I ran into this a couple months ago. I took an astral travel meditation class, and the guide actually gave us an oil that was meant to protect us from bringing back any unwanted entities. And it's so interesting because I do work with a lot of oils, ritual oils, spell oils, personal oils, but I hadn't necessarily thought of one as specifically protection. Like, for me, the oil has multiple purposes and a side effect might be protection, but if you're doing something like astral, you want to make sure that you don't bring anything back with you, and that while you're there, everything is for your highest good. And a lot of that is working with your guides, because again, that's where your guides really step in. You're at your most vulnerable. You can encounter a lot of energies that are outside of your control. And so it's really important to, at that point, lean on your guides or deities and ask them to protect you while you're traveling. And then you can use things at home, like a circle around yourself. You know what I mean? Some people would say that wouldn't work. Some people do it. Your mileage may vary. And then things like the oils to make sure you don't bring anything back with you. That's another thing too, is that if you travel or, astral travel or do anything out of body, like make sure that you cleanse when you get back. That's a great opportunity for using your bell and smoke, from your incense. Just be very careful with that. And then also, if you work with spirits, to me, that's like the same thing as astral traveling in the sense that you need to set certain guidelines, boundaries, and protections. Boundaries are great in the spiritual world because boundaries can be things like, you're only allowed to talk to me if it's, useful and not harmful. A lot of people say if it's for my greatest or highest good. I kind of want more information. So I don't set that as my hard and fast boundary all the time. I'll say as long as it's not harmful to me. And you can also set boundaries like appear to me in a way that won't frighten me, or appear to me in an energy form that won't cause me any harm, That's my biggest thing is like, hey, I don't only want experiences that are for my highest good. Like, I just want to have experiences, but make sure that it's not harmful to me and my journey. So that's kind of where I set that. Okay, so those are all the basics of protection. I probably talked a little bit longer than I expected to about that. So I hope you guys are still with me because I'm about to talk about some of the resources that are going to help you go a step further for when you want to go past this. And I'll put a link down in the bio to the Amazon list of these books, but I'm only recommending 3 books, but I will link it down below. So the first book I ever read was Protection, not the first book I ever read, obviously, but the first protection type book that I read on this part of my spiritual awakening journey was this one. It is called Protection and Reversal Magic by Jason Miller. And you can see I have a lot of notes on this one, and this is where I got a lot of the basics and just really educated myself about protection magic. And I highly recommend, I love it that you guys are watching YouTube videos for education. I also recommend reading unless you're just not a reader. But if you do like reading, I really suggest people do their own research, because as I read more and more of these, magical or spiritual books, I take something from each of them and make my own practice. Like I don't follow anybody else's practice to the letter. I make my own practice, but I do that by educating myself and like figuring out through my discernment what works for me and what doesn't. I highly suggest people get there, but sometimes it takes a while to get there. Sometimes first you want to know, hey, I trust this person. I'm going to start off by doing what they say. And then as I go further, I'll, do what Gabby said in research and discernment. Anyway, this is one of the first books I read. I highly recommend it. This is especially for making sure you're not getting targeted or cursed intentionally or unintentionally. That's where I learned a lot about that, is again, this book. Love it. Now, if you think of yourself more as like a psychic practitioner, energy practitioner first, and maybe a witch second, or maybe not a witch at all. The Psychic Witch book, actually it's just called Psychic Witch, and it's by Matt Oren, is also really, really good. You can see that I've got a lot of little tabs on this one, and I've got a bunch of different bookmarks in it too. So I really enjoyed this. I loaned it to someone that I do a lot of close spiritual work with. She loved it as well and said she learned a lot from it too. This one's great for like protecting yourself psychically and really focusing on energy protection. I will also say that this starts getting into some more serious like protection rituals. So again, I told you guys about the basics, but there are some really complicated, intense protection rituals that you can start to get into. That may or may not be necessary for you, but this book also covers basics of energy work and protecting yourself, etc. And then you can also have it for those more advanced things if and when you ever get to them, but you'll know if you need them because you've read the book and educated yourself, basically. But remember, the more advanced work you do, the more advanced your protections need to be. So I highly recommend this one if you consider yourself a psychic practitioner of any kind, right? If you're doing anything that's considered psychic work, that is obviously making you a little bit more vulnerable. The tagline of this one is a metaphysical guide to meditation, magic, and manifestation. Because I'm going to reemphasize, you need to deal with your protections even if you're just meditating. And if you're not doing basic protections while you're just meditating, you might get visions that disturb you and aren't as helpful as they could be. Or you may attract energies that you don't mean to attract. Now, if you specifically want to work with spirits and I'm going to say named entities, like even if you don't know their names, like aware spirits is probably the best way for me to put it. Consorting with spirits, I consider highly necessary. This is if you are intentionally trying to connect with the spirit of a place or a deity, or, you know, even your, well, not so much your own spirit guides, but a little bit. This talks a lot about how spirits can communicate with you, how to set boundaries with those spirits, how to be protected so that you can communicate safely. Because to me, one of the benefits of protection is that you can actually relax a little bit. Like if I'm talking to entities where I'm not familiar with them, I might be scared. But if I know I'm protected, then I'm less scared and more open to the experience, because if you're scared, you might be blocking out a lot of things, like fully blocking out experiences that can be very helpful and valuable to you. But if you're doing your basic protections, then you're comfortable and confident enough to have these experiences that are helpful and valuable to you. I hope that makes sense, right? Like, it's like if you're in real life at a bar or a club and you know you're safe at that bar or club, you're going to relax and have a good time. But if you're by yourself and you don't have your basic protections and you feel like there's like scary people in that bar or club, you are not having such a good time. It's a very different experience. It's the same thing in the spirit world. If you know you're guarded and protected, you can just relax and have the experience you're supposed to have. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, highly recommend this one. Again, Consorting with Spirits, Your Guide to Working with Invisible Allies by Jason Miller. Now, you may have noticed that all of these authors are men, and now I'm realizing I forgot this. The Protection Reversal Magic is the same author as Conjuring the Spirits. I forgot about that. He talked about a lot in this book, so I can't believe I forgot that. But yes, I do recommend both of these. And if you're just starting out, maybe start out with Protection Magic. Second, I would read Psychic Witch. Unless you don't consider yourself a magic practitioner and you're not as worried with spirits, only read Psychic Witch if you're going to read one of these books. But if you're going to read all three, I would start with the Protection Magic, then read Psychic Witch, and then read Consorting with Spirits, because I think that's the best order if you are truly progressing. But let me just repeat, if you don't consider yourself a witch and you don't want to do any sort of channeling or communicating with spirits, but you are honing your psychic powers, this is the one you need to read. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Please let me know if you guys have any other questions about protection. And then if you want me to go any deeper on any of the topics I brought up, tell me. And then if you do want me to talk more about like channeling and spirits and kind of like starting off in that world, I would not mind making that video, because that part of my practice has been evolving over the last like year or two. And some of it is very fresh with me. And so if people are going through that and have an interest, let me know. Because I feel like sometimes you talk to these people and they're like, they've been doing it for like 10, 20 years. Great experience, very helpful, but they don't always remember what it's like to be a beginner. And like I said, some of those experiences are still fresh enough for me that I might be able to relate, you know, to the questions a little bit more. All right, y'all. Thanks again. I'm Gabby from Mystic Moon Rising. I hope you enjoyed this video. Also, drop me a comment. Let me know what other videos you'd like to see. Thanks, guys.